Hi, everyone. I'll just jump straight in with my slightly controversial sub heading of Talk is Cheap, but hopefully you get it's coming from the heart. So here we go. So I want to first reference where I got this underline from. Putting the customer at the center of every discussion is easy, but it's the decision part that's hard. So I actually heard that when Verizon had acquired the company I was in a few years ago, and we were at an executive talk, and there was someone from the Mayo Clinic, and they were being asked, how did you become the best in America or potentially the world for patient experience or service? And he said it was simple. We stopped putting the customer centricity and the customer at the center of every discussion and PowerPoint, and we basically mandated that we put it at the center of every decision. Okay, so that's where I nabbed this this eureka moment. It was a throwaway comment, but it's really stayed with me over the years. Okay, so a little bit of context, obviously, just to ground us. Verizon Connect is a IoT company, a SaaS company. It has hardware or OEM with the vehicles at the heart of it. It's obviously software, it's AI, and it should be simple for the customer, but obviously that's a classic complex CX or service design challenge of all of those being as seamless as possible. What does the product do? It basically connects a mobile workforce, connected vehicles, which are pretty exciting as a space to be in. As you can see here, it has to do with safety, it has to do with driver coaching, it has to do with logistics, etc. Okay. I'm a huge believer in the patient game as we work through year by year, building teams, building strategy. But what keeps me sane as well in that long wait is also that we're a lean house. So as I was brought in to build out a user experience capability initially, and obviously expanding, as you'll see in the talk, out into wider customer experience, I ensured that the entire company was managing their expectations on the challenge ahead to build up UX years ago and use a typical maturity model to track against that. So if you see that here, to full embedding and full respect basically is the only word for the customer and for the user at the pinnacle or at the peak. This could take anywhere between 3 or 4 years all the way up to 40 years or never. According to Nielsen Norman, it's that kind of timescale depending on support and buy-in from product management, from the team themselves, from finance, etc. But many of us would be familiar with the unrecognized or UX is not important. Of course, many of us, product and UX in particular, would not work in those companies. So that's good. We're good there. Interested but limited funding. Maybe some of the audience here are within those companies. I'd really say push and push hard for the funding part and to get the interest up to urgency, because this is the differentiator in the market already. And we'll live and die on this sword in the years to come, the quality of the experience for the customer and the user. The companies that get that then begin to invest, but sporadically. We kind of call those picking a corner of success. You'll pick a project or a corner or a feature or a squad or a team, and you'll pilot it there. And as it is obviously a success, it then grows and spreads, and it becomes a pull rather than a push for the company. We want more of that. And any UX leaders on the call would know when that happens, you start to get those messages, those emails, those invites going, hey, we need more of your team on this. And then that's leading to committed. Our senior leadership committed to user experience. And the same will apply to CX as well, the wider customer experience of purchasing the product, installing the product, customer support around it, etc. And then I'm proud to say where we're operating now is between 5 and 6. So engaged, it's one of our strategic tenants. It's all over our Hoshin plans. It's all over our OKRs, not just in the product group, but in the wider company. And then, of course, the dream helped if one of your CEOs or your leaders has a background in product or design or both. But obviously, the dream is it's embedded at the leadership level, and it's grassroots all the way up as well. And it's part of every decision. There will be always a moment in every meeting where people will talk about, well, what does this mean for the customer? What will the impact be on the customer outcomes? How will this change their behavior for better, etc. Okay, so a question that has occurred in many an organization, and certainly in our company, is why do we need to unify around these customer journeys? Haven't we done the customer journey? And I'm not talking about product and UX and engineering. I'm talking about the whole company, finance, etc. And the answer is strategic alignment. Whether you're going after a bug or a new feature or some issues around satisfaction, etc., you need strategic alignment. So to align and center yourself around a solid research-based, customer contact-based customer journey needs strategic alignment. Otherwise, you get this. Everyone trying to go after this. Product, sales, support, finance, etc., all having their own initiatives and potentially spending the same, or multiple dollars instead of spending the same dollar going after the same thing. So my biggest takeaway from this talk would be really you have to do this, which is strategic alignment. Then the next question is, okay, I get it. I see the user journey, but what is it? Like what does great look like? What's an overused term now at this stage? What's your North Star, etc. But that, and I'll go into it in more detail later in this talk, but that's really the experience vision. And not just the prototype for the product, but the service design experience vision, or the CX, customer touch points of the company, how they interact with the company. That needs a vision. It needs to be based on a classic kind of 2B blueprint of the journey. And it all has to be grounded in user research. The customer and the user really have to fed into that. So that's been a bit of a breakthrough. And I haven't invented this. I'll always credit others, and people like Jared Spool and others have really been championing that there's a great alignment. Sense and Respond is another book I'd recommend as well, around the alignment of customer journeys, customer outcomes, experience visions, or those North Stars, with product management and with leadership. That's where the magic happens. Okay. So a little bit back to what I mentioned earlier, which is the lean model, which obviously lean, agile, etc., is very, very common now. But it's common to launch as, having your classic product manager or product owner within the team, the engineering lead, and of course, multiple then engineers, and then experience designer. And that's quite common, but what tends to be missed initially is the customer. The customer at the center of that. So really, an expansion of this is that a user researcher, or if that's not available, then that team themselves have customer contact and are constantly feeding in that feedback loop for build, measure, learn loop, for example. So that's a no-brainer. It's very, very common, and we do love the customer. But really to expand it out, and of course the Lean series with O'Reilly and others obviously has Lean Enterprise with it in as well. And again, Toyota and other examples over the years have shown this. But really to have this as a success, particularly in a company that's not just pure software, but has touch points in a box arriving, a thing being installed, potentially self-service, but maybe some level of customer support, etc., then this is really needed. And that is everyone in a squad-like formation or a team that is cross-functional, and again, around the customer at that same moment. You're doing the walkthroughs, you're doing the go-to-markets together, you're doing the dog food, or whatever it is, the use of the product, you're all gathering together and doing it yourselves. And then you have the harsh reality, the customer's feedback, possibly like in the old days before lockdowns, with the customer in the room, or certainly at the end of a video camera. So the Lean Enterprise CFT model is really inspiring as well, and that is where Verizon Connect is now. Okay, just a little off script. A week or two ago, I'm very proud to say that the company led, and I had to coordinate a hackathon, but that was actually the brief for me to lead it rather than an engineering leader. And something that I inserted was that the hackathon had to be focused on solving real customer problems and have a viable or feasible outcome for solving that, but actually with some great customer outcomes at the end of the hackathon. And if that wasn't big enough compared to a standard hackathon, the brief was also that it should be expanded out to include as many people who were interested in our 3,500 person team in Verizon Connect. And that's only a small corner of Verizon, obviously, but it was still a monumental challenge, and it was a great success. So that's it in practice. And something has happened. There has been a bug that has been caught because of that, and it's quite exciting. So I'd really recommend this approach of innovation days or hackathons, etc., to be all about the customer, because that's what it should be about. And the innovation comes. A lot of the entries, and the winner actually was highly innovative. Okay, so that's the point, right? I know this is the title of the talk, but throughout the company. So put the customer at the center of every discussion and then the following decision, but throughout the company, not just in the cooler teams of product UX and engineering that kind of get it and are drinking the Kool-Aid of this, but also with the Statler and Waldorfs. If anyone of a certain age can remember the two guys in the Muppet Show who were like, it'll never work. It's rubbish, too expensive, get off, get to the good material. So you got to get it to them too. And that takes time, right? But those kind of events that I mentioned earlier, and also strong leadership and courage, will ensure that that happens as well throughout the company. I know I mentioned in our survey, mentioned in the intro that initially the talk was just called Talk is Cheap, but I had to elaborate on that. I'd like if the talk was just called Talk is Cheap. But there's three ways you could describe this. There's a lot of lip service to customer centricity, okay? Everyone says they do it. But in reality, not every company, not every startup, not every Fortune whatever company is doing it. A lot of it is lip service. It's hot air. And I love that old saying you'd hear from your parents, or, it's age old, is actions speak louder than words. Or one of my favorite movies is Spinal Tap. And one great quote from that is money talks and bullshit walks. And I think that's really what customers and users are doing these days. All right. So that's where I'm going with that is it needs to be funded, it needs to be invested. It can't just be staffed customer centricity. There has to be actual line items assigned to improving these initiatives, and not kind of tucked in at the end or down the back of the couch. Okay, so I mentioned embedding the customer and the user and the voice of the customer in every single team. And how do you do that? So, well, you see it here, obviously, in the in-person experience, but obviously digitally as well. But that's a cross-functional team. But within that room will be a user researcher. Also, the team themselves will, carry out, and by that I mean product engineering, support, etc., will get involved in any one of these points that my team carry out day to day. So over the course of a year and a half, these kind of figures are achieved to hear what the customer thinks and also to see how they work. So that can be done through the lab tests, the classic old two-way or one-way mirror, two-way mirror, sorry, 100 customer field studies, so observational studies, and the ethnographic aspect of that you've 2 ears and 1 mouth. So when you turn up to a customer's location and you're watching them either buy the product or use the product or upgrade or install or use the software, and then the users use it, you should really just shut up and listen and watch and observe. So those field studies are important, and I'm thrilled to say they're coming back more and more. The customer interviews are crucial, the prototypes, a massive amount of prototypes. I mean, it's the bread and butter, obviously, of the UX team. But now we're prototyping service design prototypes as well for the overall experience. And then the remote user testing, and of course surveys, multiple surveys, product feature surveys, NPS surveys, etc. So all of that is great. It's all data, it's quant and qualitative, and it's flowing in. In fact, the next challenge when you get all that is what do you do with it, but that's probably another talk. But my recommendation is you partner with data scientists. Many companies that have had these breakthroughs have actually partnered UX research with data scientists. And that's a superb approach as well. But site visits are really where the magic happens. To go and see how the product is used or not used, or how other products are used or not used. And as Dan Olson once said, I think when he was into it, that they were competing in TurboTax with pen and paper. And you can see this here. This is a very analog world that our products are in, so we need to go out and see how they're used. I'm a big fan of Cooper as well, and jobs to be done and all of that. We're not really picking one or the other. We have a nice a la carte approach here. But what's been really empowering is giving these personas, and there are many of these personas, but giving them out to the wider company. They're based obviously on thousands and thousands of hours of research, but they're now leveraged throughout the whole company. And we love these personas. In fact, some of them have been named after some of the first site visits I did years ago when I joined the company. And on my first day, I flew to the States where the majority of our customers are, but we also have customers around the world, and met many of these people, and they were christened based on some of those visits, as have that tradition has continued with many others that have visited since then. But the customer is there, the individual users, such as the driver, not a customer, but a user. And then we have the internal personas, and we have quite a number of internal personas growing out, got to do with service or app support, as you see here, customer support representative, and the closer from sales, and they're represented now in many of the projects, the big meaty projects now, obviously, that are spinning up. And then a classic, just a reference to the format we use for personas. They've been really valuable. Okay, and the voice of the customer is everywhere, as I said, and just to be clear on where everywhere is, it's now recurring on executive staff meetings and at the ELT level within our company, actual playback of the highs and lows of some of these verbatims or interviews, etc. That's really powerful. At stand-ups, obviously as well, there needs to be some reference of customer outcomes or OKRs again there, and a reference to how the research is trending, particularly if we're truly a lean organization. That should be hot wired in. Slack channels, there's multiple customer-centric Slack channels now coming in from the tools we use that are feeding in live, again with verbatims, the scores, etc. And you can see all of the teams starting to respond for their areas. And Verizon Connect is set up in the product group in that classic feature area where basically a mini startup is assembled, and they will then swarm on any customer feedback that's related to theirs. You see them put in whatever emojis or whatever codify they have for that and what they're going to do and how they prioritize the feedback. Posters, not so much these days, but I mean, even though we're working from home most of the time, these kinds of posters in the background, as you can see with the customer love hack, but also posters got to do with the culture of that new company or a small area within the company here, maybe see on the right. So their culture around the customer evolves as well, and their rituals, etc. It has really crept in and stormed into the all hands in the company as well. As I say, the research and the voice of the customer as well, rather than just pure revenue and financials, etc. A project kickoff, a project retros. You see where I'm going with this. Research readouts. They're as bite-sized and as snappy as possible. If you're interested, you can go into the 40-page user research or cross-functional deck on reporting out how it's going, but we really need that kind of gateway or entry into the destination of the research as well. And then they really should be for action. These are not just insights to go, oh yeah, I see why that went wrong. Anyway, and then you get on to the next topic, but really it should be for action. And that works very well in some areas, maybe not so much in other areas at the moment, but we're working on it. Okay, so the next section of this is really also that we have the customer really in on the product strategy as well, influencing, informing, and helping shape through their involvement in the design process and even before the design process. So mentioned Dan Olson. This is obviously leveraging the Lean Product Playbook, which we really recommend as a team. That was a really fantastic moment when product management really started to embrace this approach, top of the funnel. And really, to explain it at its highest level, it's immersing in the customer problem space first. Understanding who the customer is, what's their need, why us, and why should we do this, and if we do, we should do it to win. It should be best for the customer and for ourselves. But you'll not move really on into the customer solution space until you've actually gone through those. But what it's showing here is that the customer's contact and the user testing and all of that is throughout every one of these initial steps. So obviously using the personas, there's in-depth interviews, there's the observational studies, all of the data flowing in either historically or on this, and it's done in a very short time frame. These potentially could be done in a matter of weeks, for a very, very big decision, a strategic decision on the MVPs and where do we start, and then the analysis of competitors' experience as well. But then the rubber starts to hit the road. Do we do this or not? And if we do it, at what level of delight or joy will be in the experience from the start, rather than just a technical or a feasible MVP. That's so often the case. There should be an element of delight in those first phases as well for the customer. And then you test those with the customers and you iterate between 4 and 5, obviously, and then you're off. You're then getting to really starting to launch your first phases. So that's how it's influencing the strategy. It's worth saying that the user research team, or the customer insights team, as we've been rebranded by the leader in that area, and we've also begun to influence then the wider strategy again, not just the lean product playbook approach, which is the product pipeline, but really the wider strategy of the company, again, using the user research to help inform that. Okay, so strategic transformation, something that I love, and I'm a little bit of a disruptor or a change agent or whatever the cliche is, but I really love this part of the job. Yes, it's challenging. Yes, it can be overwhelming, but I'd much rather this than stagnation or moving backwards or a kind of a smug, oh, aren't we great? We're number one in the industry. I mean, so strategic transformation, particularly in the past year, let's face it, and digital transformation is huge. So it's there too. Service design, really documenting the as-is experience and that blueprint and the customer journey there. As is in where we are now. And that's been invaluable to product management. It's been invaluable to our UX team. It's been invaluable to the wider company as well, because it's, again, remember, service design. It's every touch point the customer has with our service and our products. But where the fun starts is identifying those pain points and pinch points and then moving to the to be, which is our should be or could be or whatever. But to be is really that aspiration. But not just the blueprint itself of where we need to go, but what we're going towards. So that's the experience vision I talked about earlier. And it's all based, again, on UX research. Okay, and that's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of people, and a lot of time. But this is a cultural transformation that needs to happen as well. Whether you're a startup with a very charismatic or domineering founder that thinks they know the right thing to build every day, and there's plenty of them, or whether it's a very, very big behemoth organization that it can be hard to point in that one direction or stop all the spaghetti for all the great will in the world, but all that spaghetti being thrown at the wall. I'm a huge believer, and particularly after the past 4 or 5 years, a change happens one person at a time. And that is really the cultural transformation has to happen, not just with posters or with all hands, but in those one-to-one conversations, in those projects, in the teams that are actually changing the experience one release at a time. And it will take years. So even if it's a startup, it can take years to course correct on that technical debt you're all building up in your first year or 2 or 3, and some of the norms that have come in there. But certainly in the larger companies as well, it will take years. So it needs a bit of fortitude, a lot of courage. What do these customer journeys look like in a company our size? They're really huge, and actually we've moved now towards unifying them into one mega map or master map, and that's why it's hugely beneficial to other parts of the organization, because they see where they fit in. They can fit it in this section of the buy journey or the installation journey, how dependent one team is on another. And if there are any of these flashpoints or little red dots, as you can see them, of friction, they can swarm and they can work together to go after it together. That's much more powerful as a unified journey map, as massive as it is, than all of the individual journey maps that are also in existence in all of the squads or new company models that we have around the organization, kind of feature focused teams. They also have their journey maps, but for their area. But to be honest, it's quite blinkered. They do have the experience vision to move towards, they do have the business strategy to move towards, and they're obviously autonomous in what they can do. But the risk is always that they're not looking to the left and the right of the experience holistically for the customer. So this has been fantastic, and it's becoming very common, obviously, in the wider CX and product management and service design world. I mentioned Spool earlier, but this has been a real eye-opener for me. I've instinctively encouraged, and probably almost every year, if not two, done an experience vision for anywhere I've worked in any team that I've led. But this isn't new. I had the privilege of working in an industrial design team, and really that's where it comes from, is prototyping and modeling out really the future and iterating in a kind of a safe space there. And a lot of that now has been pulled into the UX world. But one of the ones that is really fascinating to see, and that he referenced, is the Apple Experience Vision way back in the 80s. But it had tablet, it had touchscreen, cloud collaboration, Siri, which is hysterically some fella in a dicky bow or bow tie for international audience, email, internet search, wiki, on and on, machine learning, AI, FaceTime, and it was called the Knowledge Navigator. And it was almost too good because, and the mistake I think they made was they showed some key shareholders and investors who then asked, when can we have it? Well, when did the iPad come out? But it really was incredible how it unified to the earlier, as was referencing earlier, how it unified the whole company around this future vision. And I believe it was done, I was actually, Steve Jobs wasn't in the building at the time, which is interesting as well. So yes. Okay, so just to recap on this, why do we need to unify around the customer journey? And it's for strategic alignment. And a lot of decisions are made at a very senior level that will impact the customers and the users and the teams for years to come. And if they are done purely for business reasons, purely for financial, purely for targets, etc., from the company's perspective, you will get this. And then these kind of skirmishes on the edges to try and improve the experience. But if the customer and the experience and the research are front and center during those strategic discussions, you'll get this, which is the alignment. And more, that also relates to the budget and the budgeting as well. So yes, I did think this was reiterating and showing twice. So I think in summary, and I'm put deliberately in here CX as well, because there's no point in having a great user experience or a portion of the product that's really phenomenal, but it's very, very difficult to purchase potentially, or it can be very difficult to use products. The physical installation or the software can be difficult. That's just really going to put undue pressure then obviously on the support teams. So that CX strategic alignment is really, really required and important. So embed the experience, not just the UX team, the user research, the customer-centered team or CFT, including product management. You share that out. It's not a kind of a secret club or an invite-only deck. It should be shared far and wide. Open up the permissions to those drives, have them available for years so you can go back and reference. Use customer journey maps, and maps plural, as I said, every area. And everyone is focused on their area of responsibility, should have a customer journey map for their area. But then don't forget to actually then pull it all together. You should iterate with the customer and the user. They have to give their feedback. They have to almost co-design this. Personas help in that respect as well. Use multi-year service design blueprints. So that's where as I said, the rubber hits the road, is these really big, long time frame transformational projects. And that's where the blueprints will really help. But you can't have a blueprint and not start really showing the prototype of the house if you're an architect. You just have blueprints. It's very hard for people to visualize and feel what that house is going to be like to walk in and to live in, to sleep in. So that's where you develop the multi-year experience visions as well, to go, is that where you're putting the bedroom? Is that where the sink is going to be? Is that where the sun comes up? So that's really for that strategic alignment again. And that helps transform the company. And that helps to transform the company around the customer. And by the way, we're hiring. If any of this was of interest, we are expanding, obviously, in all the areas I discussed. And that is me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Donal. It was a very interesting presentation. So I've got a question for you.
Great.
So what is the key point required to encourage all the folks in the organization to take the customer centricity seriously, not just as a talk from the top level?
Yeah, that's a very common question. To encourage it, I think it needs a couple of approaches. One is, and I know I'm repeating myself, but it is so important, is you've got to actually press play on the voice of the customer. So that either joy, and by the way, don't always focus on the dark. You've got to move towards the light as well. But press play on the joy that the customer hears because of an improvement or a release or a breakthrough or an amazing service or a support agent, whatever. Press play in that in each one of the levels and layers of the company, not just a deck like what I've shown here. I can't, but wouldn't it be amazing if I press play on some customer feedback or interviews? So that's one. And the other, so that's the carrot, is, and of course they can be very difficult calls or interviews to hear as well, but we've got to do it. The other one is you've got to basically show the financial impact of not doing this. And there'll be examples of that in the best of companies, the best, most user-centered, customer-centered, latest and greatest. There are going to be many examples of customers who are really not happy. There will be a financial impact of that, whether it's churn or not expansion or poor promoter scores, net promoter scores, they're detractors. So that financial impact can be quantified as well. And that's where product management really need to come in from the business point of view. And it's where finance need to come into, as I say, fund this kind of transformation and culture change. Just hiring the staff, as we've seen in the world, just hiring the staff isn't good enough. If it's all talk, but no action, those staff go elsewhere. So there's a financial impact to that as well. So I think particularly UX and the ROI of UX, that's where we've lived for quite a few years now at that stage. So you're going to marry the actual emotion and the words of the customer with then the financial impact. Good, as in the charts are going up, put those together, but then show the charts going down when there's someone using pretty colorful language on a recording that you're playing in front of your team or the ELT.
And yeah, I've got there is no other questions from audience, so I've got one more question for you. There is something I noticed in the middle of your presentation, that in your personas you had some internal personas, and yes. And that's something that I buy a lot into as an experience of internal team.
Yeah,
like I don't know if you can call it user experience, but it is an experience there, people. Yeah. So what do you think, and how can we put an additional importance on experience of the employees as well, not only customers but employees?
Well, how it happened logically in our company is that once there was some rituals or some events scheduled which were pre-go-to-market or pre-launch that involved those team members, which you really should. You should involve people who work in service support or customer support or sales in that. Obviously, you're meant to be collaborating as a cross-functional team, but they're involved in that. They may then start to air some either concerns or frustration about what's been planned, and even, let's face it, after launch. But those insights are gold. They're absolute gold. The product management team, the engineers, even the user researchers will never match the customer contact that sales and customer support have. So just bring them in. But then if you bring them in, you really should formalize how you're building for them too. Like, okay, we'll get this out the door. It'll be installed like this, or the onboarded like this. It's easy. We got this cool little widget, or we'll get a mobile app or whatever. But the support team may go, yeah, but this is going to, potentially miss an opportunity here for our internal tooling and for the user experience externally. So we just turn them, Sergey, as you said, we just term them as internal users. And occasionally we even refer to them as internal customers. Why? Because we're building for a request for a tooling that might be used for self-serve externally, for the users externally, but could be such a great tool that it could be used by the internal team as well. So that's it. Just involve them in the team, and then afterwards ask them how it went, and then you build up your research over a couple of weeks or months to then create with them, and they all asked for it as well, a persona for them, and it represents them, and they're as proud as punch when they see a sales persona or a support persona being referenced in a project meeting or in a workshop or after launch. How do you think Carmelo would feel about this? What have we missed something here for Carmelo in sales? And then you're onto a winner, because they're referring to Carmelo with a salesperson either in the room or not, whether a workshop or not, and then the decision happens to improve that for both the customer and for the salesperson. So that's a breakthrough.
Great, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thanks so much.